This is BBC One, and with the news at 9:15, Martyn Lewis.
Makeshift barricades go up in the centre of Peking as thousands of protesters continue to break martial law. A military helicopter has carried out a reconnaissance of the demonstrators, but more troops have been persuaded to turn back as tens of thousands of intellectuals and workers answer the call to join the public defiance of the government. And Merseysiders united in silence before a Liverpool FA Cup victory. Good evening. Hundreds of thousands of people are still defying martial law in the centre of Peking. At the start of the second day of the government's new measures to control unrest, the students have been joined by thousands of workers and intellectuals. Barricades and roadblocks have been erected overnight around Tiananmen Square to protect the demonstrators from an army attack. But a short while ago, the Peking city authorities repeated that the army were in the city centre to keep law and order, not to suppress the students. The promise came at the end of a day that saw a media crackdown, but little evidence that martial law had been effectively imposed. Fighting between demonstrators and troops was reported on at least 2 occasions, but the protesters persuaded several troop convoys heading for the main square to turn back.
This was supposed to be the day that martial law clamped down on this capital. Instead, the rebellion led by students seemed to be gaining support. 24 hours after the first hint of tough measures, Tiananmen Square was still under student control, and the hunger strike had been resumed. Those students I talked to a short while ago still fear a military assault. In a move to demoralize the activists, army helicopters swooped low over the square, but because of the density of the people below, there was no chance of them landing. The martial law announcement was made by Prime Minister Li Peng at a Politburo meeting from which Party Secretary Zhao Jiang was conspicuously absent. The communist authorities are trying to suppress reporting by the scores of Western journalists who came here for the Sino-Soviet summit and found themselves witnessing a revolt. The students are still being supported by large numbers of workers, and with tension running high, there's a real risk of bloodshed. The question this weekend is the unity and resolve of the army. The students say they're sure soldiers will refuse to obey orders to crush the protest. It now looks as if the army has withdrawn for the moment. Martial law has been declared, but has yet to take effect. Brian Barron, BBC News, Peking.
The imposition of martial law and use of the military to solve China's political problems has been widely criticised, and the condemnation is starting to come from senior officials and academics within China itself.
One of the reasons the Chinese authorities have found the pro-democracy demonstrations so threatening is that they've gone beyond a student protest. When professional people such as doctors, academics and journalists joined the protests, the government knew it was in trouble. The student leaders' credibility has been enhanced by the fact that they have this support. Age and learning count for a lot in Chinese society. Reports say 4 major academic institutions in China have now condemned the imposition of martial law. Professor Hua Shun, an economist at one of those institutes, is in Britain.
We're strongly against the martial law because we think that will create really turmoil or even create a division among the Chinese people.
Those fears have been echoed by the Foreign Office. In one of the first reactions from a Western government, it said it was concerned by the imposition of martial law. Today, Chinese living in Britain have been showing their support for the pro-democracy demonstrations in Peking. A number of them have been gathering outside the London embassy.
The apparent rise of the hardline communist leaders, such as Prime Minister Li Peng, has had an unsettling effect in Hong Kong, which changes to Chinese rule in 1997. Several thousand people today braved a typhoon to march on Chinese government offices. There are also reports of Hong Kong students going on hunger strike in support of the student demonstrators in Peking. Now, we understand that our correspondent Brian Barron is on the phone from Peking now. Brian, are there any late developments there?
Well, there are still tens of thousands of people packed into Tiananmen Square. I'm talking about 200 yards away from it. I've just come from a meeting that's taking place on the steps of the Great Hall of the People, where there are 2,000 or 3,000 students listening to a very defiant speech by one of their leaders. And there's still a mood of some apprehension about whether the military are going to actually make it into the square today. But otherwise, I'd say that the demonstrators are standing firm.
Brian, if the troops aren't ordered into the square, won't the government lose credibility and fall?
I think that the longer the delay goes on, the greater the loss of face for the government. Inevitably, the more intense the strains within the Politburo, within the communist hierarchy. But it then becomes very speculative as to what the generals, the army commanders will do if they sense that the politicians, that the country's rulers are actually losing ground and losing complete credibility.
Brian, thanks very much indeed. We'll come back to you if there are any further developments during the programme. Here, the officer in charge of the policing at today's FA Cup final has praised the supporters of both Liverpool and Everton for making the whole of Merseyside the real Wembley winners. But his men have charged a turnstile operator with letting in ticketless fans for money. And now, with the story of the final itself and Scotland's final between Rangers and Celtic, here's David Icke.
Liverpool have won the FA Cup, beating Everton 3-2 after extra time in a thrilling and emotional final. Merseyside's pilgrimage to Wembley had been billed as a memorial to those who died at Hillsborough. Fittingly, the football paid the most eloquent tribute.
There were three teams at Wembley today: Liverpool, Everton and Merseyside United. The police controlled security and safety outside. Despite efforts by the FA and police to stop it, the black market in match tickets was still operating.
£22 a ticket, bought it for 70.
And how much did you sell it on for?
100.
How do you justify that?
Well, people are paying over the odds. I paid over the odds, so I sold it.
There were further expressions of regional pride inside the stadium. It got the better of patriotism as the national anthem was drowned out by Merseyside's. Moments later, silent respect for the Hillsborough dead. Liverpool, the favourites on form and national sympathy, made an extraordinary start. Their first attack after 4 minutes gave Aldridge his first touch, a goal for the man who last year had missed a cup final penalty. But urged on by their manager Colin Harvey, Everton staged a revival that was to transform the match. And in the very last minute, they equalised through their substitute McCall. It meant extra time. 5 minutes after the restart, Liverpool's more famous substitute put them back in front. Ian Rush, his first goal since February. But again, Everton came back. McCall, again, the scorer. An extraordinary occasion was producing a game to match. Rush's second was Liverpool's conclusive third. His season of intermittent form now irrelevant, he was back to his £3 million best. With the removal of Wembley's perimeter fencing, there was a pitch invasion at the end. It was largely good-natured, but once the cup had been presented, there was little else to see. The fans on the pitch disrupted the traditional lap of honour. The fencing goes back up for England's fixture on Tuesday. Long after then, though, today's thrilling match will be remembered as a memorial to the 95 who died at Hillsborough.
In Liverpool, Cup final day brought further evidence of the camaraderie that's built up between Liverpool and Everton supporters since Hillsborough. Those who couldn't get match tickets crowded into city centre pubs to watch the game together, but traditional rivalries weren't forgotten.
On a normal hot Saturday afternoon, streets in the centre of Liverpool would be thronged with thousands of shoppers. But an all-Merseyside FA Cup final, 5 weeks after the Hillsborough disaster, meant a mass exodus of fans. In a city unrivalled in its affection for football, scores of fans not able to get tickets for the game packed into city centre pubs. Everton and Liverpool supporters watched side by side as their teams battled out a memorable cup final. It was a display of unity indicative of the atmosphere in Liverpool in recent weeks. Everton fans were jubilant after an equaliser in the dying seconds of normal time. But as Liverpool ran out eventual winners, it was the turn of their fans to raise their glasses and start preparing for the team's victorious return home tomorrow.
It's also been Cup final day in Scotland. The two great Glasgow rivals, Celtic and Rangers, met at Hampden Park. A single goal gave Celtic the cup and denied Rangers their third trophy of the season.
In Glasgow, whatever your colours, optimism wasn't in short supply. The same couldn't be said for tickets. The 70,000 available, only half of what the fans required. So police sealed off every road to Hampden to ensure no one without one got through. Unless, of course, you happen to own the city's best vantage point for what is arguably the biggest club game in the world. Rangers, chasing the treble, showed total commitment, but Celtic were desperate to turn a disappointing season into a final triumph. But it was a tragic error by England fullback Gary Stevens which gave Joe Miller a chance he simply couldn't miss. The Celtic support loved it, but Walters might have silenced them within a minute. Somehow, though, Celtic held on. It was a day Rangers' form deserted them. With 4 minutes left, Ali McCoist should have sent the match into extra time. Instead, it left Rangers dejected, their hopes of a treble gone. Tonight, it's the other half of Glasgow that's celebrating.
In Spain, 7 people have been convicted of public health and fraud charges in connection with the death of 700 people from an illness caused by cheap cooking oil in 1981. Relatives of the dead and the many thousands who are still injured reacted angrily that they had not been found guilty of manslaughter. More than 23,000 people are still suffering from eating the cheap cooking oil. Many people inside the court wept, and some were unable to contain their frustrations. Police were called in to deal with angry relatives. Outside the court, the police had to fire rubber bullets after protesters tried to invade the building. One of those convicted received a jail sentence of 20 years, but the rest had sentences ranging from 4 years to 12. And we just heard that the power workers have been offered a pay rise of 9.2%, and their unions are recommending their members to accept it. They have called off their industrial action, which was due to start on May the 24th. The Social Democratic Party's leader, David Owen, has said the party will continue to exist, although in a slimmed-down form. It's facing a crisis of declining membership and reduced income. Dr. Owen had to fight off an attack on his leadership at the party's council meeting in Coventry.
It didn't look like a party in its death throes, but these are the activists. With only 11,000 members nationwide, the SDP is in danger of becoming an irrelevant rump. Today they had to decide whether to stay in business, and if so, what for. Their leader, Dr. David Owen, and President John Cartwright had upset many members by hinting they might consider rejoining the Labour Party. Former parliamentary candidate John Martyn said they had betrayed the party.
To mention it is a signal of weakness, telling the listener or viewer that you are uncertain of your own strength, and reminding them of the growing strength of Labour.
The mood of grim defiance was symbolised by a popular button badge. But Dr. Owen drew much of the sting of the attack by saying that while he believed in inter-party cooperation, he too was committed to the SDP.
The SDP is staying in political business. We are sticking with it.
Mr. Martyn withdrew his critical motion and a damaging split was avoided. So the SDP remains in business, if only just. There are clear, open and acrimonious divisions between the political idealists and the political realists within the party.
And that's the BBC News Tonight. Good night.
Neil Kinnock invites you to take a new look at Labour. After 10 years of opposition, his party's emerged from one trauma after another with the slogan, "Meet the challenge, make the change." What's behind these words? Neil Kinnock goes on the record in his first major interview since the publication of Labour's policy review. Where does he stand on defence, the unions, nationalisation and the market economy? Neil Kinnock and the New Socialism is on the record tomorrow at 1 o'clock on BBC One.
Good evening to you. We've just had the warmest day of the year so far, at least many parts of the country have, long last reaching the 80 degrees Fahrenheit mark. More warm weather to come, but perhaps just the odd thundery shower as well. We're going to have this high pressure on the scene, though, for at least the next few days. Now, on the satellite picture, you can see very little cloud around the British Isles. 1 or 2 thundery showers over northern Spain, and certainly a lot over there into eastern Europe. But tonight, fine and dry, I think, just about everywhere. That low cloud beginning to head westwards again during the course of the night. And 1 or 2 outbreaks of thundery rain perhaps coming across the Channel Islands, the far southwest, and then eventually moving up into Ireland towards the end of the night. And a quite warm night, I think you're going to find it just about everywhere. And then tomorrow a little bit on the grey and misty and murky side in many central and eastern parts to begin with, but it won't be long before the sun comes through. And then really for much of us, a dry day again, a reasonable amount of sunshine. But there will be those showers developing during the course of the afternoon into the evening, just here and there. I think most places escaping them, but 1 or 2 showing up, more particularly in Wales and I think southwestern parts of England, as well as later on in Ireland. But the best of sunshine, Northern Ireland, I would think, central and western parts of Scotland. Again, those eastern coastal areas of Scotland staying quite grey and misty, and that's really going to hold the temperature down, whereas in other areas it'll be another very warm day.
Sunday night on BBC One. In a new series at 6:40, Valdunicans, Homeward Bound. Then at 7:15, 3 Up, 2 Down.
I'm very fond of you, Daff.
I know.
Despite your many faults.
I beg your pardon?
At 7:45, All Creatures, Great and Small.
Is it foot and mouth?
Could well be.
At 8:40, Mastermind, with specialist subjects including Greek mythology and the life and works of Vaughan Williams. At 9:25, That's Life discovers Toby.
And that one?
The amazing Counting Dog, and looks at the best way to eat spaghetti. Then at 10:10, Everyman reports from Armenia, devastated by earthquake in 1988, but still haunted by memories of their worst tragedy, the atrocities of 1915. Sunday night on BBC One.